Did you ever have a game that a ton of your friends were super into, but for one reason or another, you just never gave it a fair chance? For me, that game was Borderlands. I remember back when the first game and its sequel were released, it had a ton of my friends hooked. Chances are, if they weren't playing Modern Warfare 2 with me, they were playing Borderlands with each other. They sung the praises for how the game was both incredibly funny, while also having an addictive and deep gameplay loop. For me though, there was just something about the game that just didn't click with me that I couldn't put my finger on. Maybe it was the cel-shaded art style. After all, I was the same person who scoffed at the Wind Waker while jerking off the Twilight Princess. Perhaps it was the idea of the grindy nature of the game, since I didn't want to feel like my time was being wasted for a minimal reward. Or it could have been simply the fact that the idea of an FPS with RPG mechanics was a strange prospect at the time. Whatever the reason, I mainly stuck to playing more traditional shooters, and I let the series pass me by. This was up until a few years ago when I found the entire series was discounted on Steam. This is by no means a monumental event, as the series always sees steep discounts whenever Steam is having a big sale. Seriously, 2K Games is like the Burlington Coat Factory of game publishers with how often they discount their titles. I decided to go ahead and pick up the first two games in the series as one of my buddies and I decided to give it a shot. We jumped in with Borderlands 2 as he had already played the previous entry, and we had a great time. I was actually shocked with how much I enjoyed my time with Borderlands 2, after how apprehensive I was toward the series back in my younger days. I thought the game's art style was incredible, the variety in the environments was interesting, the gameplay loop of getting increasingly powerful equipment was fun, and even most of the humor was charming and engaging.
Kill me, you should probably know. You'll never take me alive, you robotic son bitch!
Occasionally cringy, as much of the humor from 2012 was. Hell, this was the year that gave us that movie Ted.
Hey, it must be weird for you guys having a doll up here on the stand with no kid pointing to where his uncle touched him.
God, I hated that fucking film. Regardless of the cringe, my point still stands. Borderlands 2 is a good game, and one I recommend wholeheartedly for anyone looking to have some fun with a couple of buddies. During my playtime of the second game, the person I was playing with spoke of the vast improvement that the sequel was over the original. It got me asking, what were the key improvements made between the games? How did the series get its start, and is Borderlands 1 still worth playing today? I hope to answer all of those questions and more in this video. But first, I'm now streaming live on Twitch, so if you are interested in getting a sneak peek of some upcoming projects, or you just want to hang out and have some fun, please feel free to give my Twitch channel a look. And if you enjoy what you see in the video today, maybe consider giving a like, subscribing, and checking out some of my other content on my channel. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the origins of Borderlands. Randy Pitchford is often considered the father of the Borderlands series, as he is attributed as the creator, a designer, executive producer, voice actor, and writer for the first game. Aw, what's wrong, Randy? Couldn't take on the extra load and be the composer too? Didn't want to bother being the head of Gearbox's HR? Too lazy to be the caterer for the team? But seriously, the entire Borderlands series is essentially the man's baby, and this is thanks to his experience in the industry prior to Borderlands' release. See, Pitchford is no rookie when it came to game development. Being the co-founder of Gearbox Software, he played an important role in designing the Atomic Edition of Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and a few of the expansion packs for the original Half-Life. Eventually, he created the Brother in Arms series, which were essentially World War II shooters that had a slight tactical element to them. Around 2005, Gearbox set their sights on a new project. This new IP was set to be a cross between Halo and Diablo, within a Mad Max-style setting. Randy Pitchford took additional influence from his development of Duke Nukem 3D, as well as his love for the Ultima series during the game's development. This was seen as a bit of an ambitious idea, as the FPS and RPG genres often clashed in terms of what their players were looking for. RPG players enjoying the long form of character building and storytelling, while the FPS players typically look for the short-term accomplishments of clearing rooms of enemies and blowing shit up. Though this formula has proven to work with the recent RPG shooter hybrids of Fallout 3 and Mass Effect. Actually, both of these games played an important role when it came to developing Borderlands' art style. See, Borderlands wasn't always this cartoony, cel-shaded style that we typically associate with it today. Back in 2008, it was all about the brown military shooter, with Mass Effect, along with Gears of War, giving multiple art design cues to Gearbox during the development period. Fallout 3, on the other hand, was the game that Borderlands was constantly being compared to, with its realistic imagery, RPG FPS hybrid style of play, and an emphasis on gaining loot. It almost seemed like there was little to differentiate the two games outside of the vehicle combat offered in Borderlands. This got Gearbox thinking of what they could do to stand out from the sea of brown and gray muted color palette shooters of the late 2000s. Enter Ben Hibben's short film Code Hunters, a movie that I've never heard of. Upon a quick watch though, oh yeah, this oozes the Borderlands atmosphere that I'm familiar with. Or I guess that Borderlands has a Code Hunters atmosphere, I should say, as this film was released 3 years prior. There was even a point where Hibbon himself was contacted in order to do the art for the game, but apparently negotiations didn't go anywhere. That didn't stop Gearbox from running with this cel-shaded art style that the film had on display. I guess this technically makes Randy Pitchford the Thomas Edison of game design, with how much stuff he blatantly took from other creators. I mean, to be fair, the best thing to happen to the Code Hunters movie was being associated with the Borderlands franchise, since it brought so many new eyes to the film, showing that sometimes exposure is a good enough form of payment for artists.
Move this man!
I kid. This change did end up coming about 75% of the way through the game's development, though, and this was also followed by a rework of the skill trees to occur in order to make them more fantasy-based. These two factors ended up causing the game to be delayed into 2009. 2K and Gearbox are both very positive towards the art style shift. However, there was one person that was not happy with this change, and that was the original lead art designer. I don't know what her name was, but apparently she got so upset with the direction that 2K and Gearbox took the art style, she left the company and the game industry altogether. Yeah, that'll teach those corporate fucks who's right. I bet the series suffered because they didn't listen to her and I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Borderlands was released in October of 2009 to both PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, followed by a PC port about a week later. And then, the series took the gaming world by storm. Borderlands garnered reviews in the low to mid 80s across all platforms. Chris Waters of GameSpot gave the game an 85 and said, "Fun combat and a steady flow of rewards make this journey a massively enjoyable one, especially with some fellow mercenaries along for the ride." The game even placed 35th on IGN's Top 100 Modern Games list. That's an interesting placement. I wonder what else is on here.
Jason!
Oh, no, it's okay. The list was published in 2011. They didn't know. Sales-wise, Borderlands managed to sell over 2 million copies in less than a couple of months. Not bad for a new IP. Borderlands went on to see multiple versions released over the years. Shortly into 2010, we had a retail download content packs for the first two expansions, The Zombie Island of Dr. Ned and Mad Moxie's Underdome Riot. Nearing the end of the year, we also saw the Game of the Year edition, which had all 4 of the DLCs bundled, as well as a hand-drawn map and an access code to some special items and a demo for Gearbox's upcoming game. And that game was...
I'm sure it's not that noticeable.
All right.
2019 saw another version of the Game of the Year edition released, which was the enhanced version. You still following me? It's starting to get a little confusing. This version was the same as the other Game of the Year edition, but added some 4K visuals, HDR support, some quality of life updates in Borderlands 2, and the ability to play 4-player split-screen co-op on consoles. This is the version of the game I'm going to be looking at today. So yeah, the game has gone through some numerous facelifts over the years, and has seen some notable additions. Hell, 2020 even saw a Switch port of the game, for God's sakes. Alright, now that we've got all the formalities out of the way, we can jump headfirst into Borderlands to see how well the game holds up today. Now I want to walk into this game with an open mind, one that isn't constantly comparing the game to later entries in the series or modern games in general. At the same time though, I think it's important to look at the game in a modern context because there's a whole franchise, hell, a whole genre of games that have had over a decade to develop and iterate on this formula, but maybe there is still something special about the original Borderlands that is still worth going back to. Let's start with the story. So hey, if you don't want this honestly bare bones old ass story spoiled for you, please skip to this time in the video. So the year is 2864, and megacorporations have utilized most of Earth's natural resources. Hey, hold on, give me a sec. Nope, this isn't my Dead Space script. Well, okay, anywho. So what do megacorporations do when there is nothing left to take on Earth?
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
Pandora, to be exact, a newly discovered planet on the edge of the galaxy. One of the largest companies, the Atlas Corporation, attempted to settle the planet, noting the strange alien ruins that were scattered throughout the land, that in previous expeditions yielded vaults with advanced alien technology and weapons. The trip to Pandora was a bust though, as no weapons were found and the hostile fauna posed a significant threat to the vault hunting. This caused the Atlas Corporation to close up shop and for the Dahl Corporation to move in to do their own vault hunting. This was kind of like trading in Jeff Bezos for Elon Musk as your boss. Actually, with the Dahl Corporation's use of convicts to mine resources, that analogy isn't actually too far-fetched. The Dahl Corporation has Patricia Tanis as the leader of the operation, a respected crazy archaeologist who, after losing multiple of her crazy colleagues, she begins creating crazy audio logs detailing how crazy she has been in developing crazy romantic feelings for her echo recorder crazy, as well as 2 crazy chairs.
Day 578. I haven't slept in 3 days. I just ate 6 bugs in alphabetical order, starting with Carabas auronitis and ending with a dessert obstetric santillata.
Did I mention she's a bit strange? Anyways, Tanis eventually finds proof of the existence of a vault and relays this information back to Dahl, but this info is shortly intercepted by Atlas, who sent their private military force, the Crimson Lance, after her to get the vault's location. Fearing for the oncoming invasion, the Dahl Corporation left the operation with the most wealthy, leaving the poor and the convicts to fend for themselves on Pandora. Despite all the big red flags with skulls on them that say, "Don't you fucking think about it," our main characters arrive to Pandora to seek the riches of the vault. These new metal band rejects are simply known as the Vault Hunters, or whatever you want to name them. I didn't mind Brock Laser. See my buddy over there? That's Val Kilmore. My other friend? Whatever the default name was. Not sure I understand the pun there, but to each their own. First we got Brick, a sturdy built big man who doesn't really talk and essentially acts as a blank slate for the player. Okay, fair enough, we need to have a protagonist like that sometimes. Next we have Roland, an ex-Crimson Lance member who doesn't really talk and essentially acts as a blank slate for the player. Disappointing, but okay, there's at least a little bit of character there. Next we have Mordecai, a former sharpshooter who has been roaming the galaxy to get what he believes he deserves, who doesn't really talk and essentially acts as a blank slate for the player. And Lilith, a being that shows extraordinary powers from a group of all-female magic users known as the Sirens. She doesn't really talk and essentially acts as a blank slate for the player. Okay, come on. These backstories are actually kind of cool, except for maybe Brick, he's just a strong boy, but come on. A little generic, yeah, but you could create some pretty interesting dialogues and situations for these characters rather than them spouting the same 20 reactionary voice lines and 4 different grunts every time I jump. Our heroes arrive in Firestone, a small town in the arid Badlands of Pandora, by bus. The bus driver turns out to be Marcus Kincaid, an illegal weapons dealer that owns all of the weapon vending machines you'll find in the game. During the bus ride, the Vault Hunters also get a vision of this blue lady who is definitely not Cortana. Her name is Angel, and she says she will help guide us on our expedition. Leaving the bus, we get introduced to CL4P-TP, otherwise known as Claptrap, easily the most well-known character in the Borderlands series. I was actually shocked to see that Claptrap wasn't super annoying this game.
Oh my god! I think I'm leaking!
I mean, don't get me wrong, they're annoying, but not irritatingly so. Claptrap sets us up with an echo device that allows our heroes to sync their DNA up to the Hyperion respawn stations. It is a little detail, but I always like when games integrate a respawn mechanic into the actual world. So nice job, Borderlands, you can sit right next to Bioshock and Dark Souls in that regard. So after clearing out a group of bandits from Firestone, we get introduced to Dr. Zed, a doctor with a medical degree from After that, we have a tutorial sequence that goes on for far too long. Seriously, the beginning of the game felt like such a drag with the need to drip feed mechanics to the players. Eventually, this tutorial culminates in a showdown with a man called Sledge.
Dreamed of the thrill as they feel the dust spill.
Is anyone even gonna get that reference? Anyways, after killing Mr. Sledge and taking his beefy fucking shotgun, we take an ancient alien artifact that turns out to be a fragment of a vault key. A member of the Crimson Lance, Commandant Steele, demands that our heroes turn over the fragment of the key because she is evil and Russian, which in video games is a fucking tautology. This prompts Patricia Tanis to get in contact with the Vault Hunters, telling them the vault may only be opened every 200 years, and that time is soon approaching. She also says they have to get 3 more pieces of the key in order to open the vault. And our Vault Hunters do just that, securing the second and third pieces rather quickly. During this time, our characters had plenty of opportunities to meet a myriad of other characters, including Scooter, a redneck who operates the catch-a-ride stations, Helena Pierce, someone who is watching over the town of New Haven, and TK Baja, a blind weaponsmith. The team also gets an opportunity to further flesh out the world of Pandora by partaking in side quests, which by reading the quest notes and the quest logs allows players to get a little bit more immersion out of the world. Eventually, Tanis sends us after a bandit named Baron Flint, claiming he has the final piece of the key. But after negotiating with Flint to turn over the key, we find out from Steele that there is no such fragment, and that Tanis has been manipulating us the whole time. God, this really is my Dead Space script, isn't it? So Commandant Steele shuts down the Echo network, preventing any further communication from us to Angel. Our heroes then go and rescue Patricia Tanis from a Crimson Lance facility, reopen the connection, and make a mad dash towards the vault in order to stop Steele and the Atlas Corporation's plans. They get to the vault mere moments after it has been opened to see Steele get massacred by a giant vagina monster appropriately named the Destroyer. So after slaying the beast, it is revealed that the vault will now remain closed for another 200 years, that the voice of Angel came from a Hyperion satellite in Pandora's orbit, and that same satellite sent a signal to a claptrap unit to become an interplanetary ninja assassin. Okay. And then the game ends. See you in the DLC. Alright. The story in Borderlands is like the story in porn. It exists purely to get characters into more exciting situations. Look, it's about as bare bones of an RPG plot as you can get. Honestly, it's not too far away from your standard Pokemon plot structure. But a good cast of characters can elevate a standard plot to greater heights. And these characters were... okay-ish. Some of them. Commandant Steele is literally just Makarov with tits. Some of the characters I think are fine in this game, and they definitely expand upon them in the sequel. Scooter, Dr. Zed, Patricia Tanis, Marcus Kincaid, Angel, all of the main characters, hell, fucking Claptrap, all lay a pretty solid groundwork for characters that become a lot more vibrant in the sequel. Speaking of making comparisons to the sequel, I keep going back and forth on what I feel about the writing. See, the writing in Borderlands 1 is played much more seriously than its sequel. There is still the myriad of pop culture reference and a ton of dark humor to be found, but it's a lot more dry and deadpan in this game, and I kinda like it for that. There were many times in Borderlands 2 that I would let out an audible groan when a joke was being made, but I never did that in the first game. Sure, I never had any real laugh out loud moments either, but I would say it was an overall higher net positive in regards to its humor. It's actually a little strange that the thing that may have aged the best with this game is the writing. I honestly would have never guessed that. Overall, while the plot kind of sucked and some of the characters fell flat, I had a pretty decent romp through Borderlands campaign. I decided to clear all the side missions in the base game and read through a number of quest logs in order to get some more info on the world I was exploring and the characters I was interacting with. The writing really helped keep the game interesting. It actually kind of bums me out that the series didn't stick with this dry delivery, as I think it added a ton to the game's atmosphere. Speaking of... Borderlands' vibe is honestly unlike any other series in gaming I can think of. I already mentioned how the humor has this dry delivery that honestly reminds me so much of a British comedy, but I think that adds a lot to the overall aesthetics of the game. Pandora is a shitty place to live. Being set almost entirely in a wasteland, we get to see firsthand how the capitalist practices of the previously mentioned megacorporations have affected those that call this planet home. Industrialization has left trash heaps and pollution throughout the lands. Those that are living here have to resort to underhanded business or gangs in order to make a living, and even those seem to live in mostly poverty. When characters are cracking jokes and making gags, it is usually done to show just how terrible it is to live on this planet. While I do think the environment does a great job of conveying the themes and contributing to the story of Borderlands, it does get very samey after a few hours. Your choices of environments are desert, wasteland, cave, poverty-stricken town with a wall, industrial base, trash heap that's a little wet, and eventually a snow-covered mountain near the end of the game. The environments themselves aren't poorly designed by any means. In fact, if there was any string of 3 to 4 of these areas in a pool of more environmentally diverse locations, I would actually enjoy them a lot. But walking into your 5th wasteland in a row, you start to be able to distinguish each area even less from one another. It's like trying to marathon all of the Saw movies. You might remember the first one really well, but by the 6th or 7th movie, you're probably going to have the events confused between what happened to each film. Speaking from experience here, don't marathon those movies. This doesn't help that the palette for the game is very brown and gray, with very little visual variation in the environments. This is propped up a pretty considerable amount by the use of the cel-shaded art style, which I believe still holds up incredibly well today. Playing through Borderlands gives me a very big comic book feel, with the thick outlines and the way that the characters pop out from their surroundings. Hell, every time you shoot at an enemy, damage numbers pop out of them, which reminds me so much of the bang bang, booms, pows, and other onomatopoeias that you would see in a traditional comic. This comic book feel also transcends into the audio design. The performances of the voice actors are exaggerated to really drive home the tropes of each character they are trying to play. My personal favorite being Patricia Tanis, whose delivery of her descent into insanity is both played for laughs, but is also slightly worrying as we follow her instructions through a number of points in the game. Playing as Brick, I also got a kick out of his grunts and maniacal laughter whenever I activated his main ability. Some of you guys are afraid to moan, but Brick's in his girl's ears like... Something that was also slightly worrying was the way that the game was optimized. During my playthrough, I encountered a number of issues that would turn up time and time again that became rather bothersome. At first I said, okay, it's a game from 2009, give them a break. This came from a period of time when people thought Heavy Rain was a good game after all. But then I remembered, I'm playing the Enhanced Edition from 2019. All bets should be off at this point. So one issue that I noticed right away came when adjusting the settings in the menu. First, unless I'm doing something completely wrong, when attempting to adjust a setting, you have to click through a selection of options, but there doesn't seem to be a way to go back to a previous option by clicking. Like, I see a back arrow right here, but when I click it, it just still moves me forward to the next choice. You can really tell that these menus were made for consoles without any consideration to what works for the PC audience. Another minor issue I saw was that every time I would close and relaunch the game, my in-game voice settings would default to being always on. This was strange because even in the options menu, the in-game voice setting was still switched to always off. Probably the worst issue I found was actually an issue that is exclusive to the enhanced version of the game. So apparently this version of the game not only has the poorly optimized issues I previously mentioned, but also memory leaks and RAM crashes. I did some digging and what I found is that every time you leave an instanced area, all of the corpses and loot from the previous area fail to deload, meaning that the game is still utilizing RAM in order to remember that all of those items still exist rather than despawning them. This eventually can cause issues with frame rates and graphical fidelity. Thankfully, it's as simple as quitting out and relaunching the game in order to fix said issues, but it's something to be noted nevertheless. So, technical issues aside, Borderlands has a pretty solid gameplay loop that I think still holds up better than some other modern games today.
Hello! Crazy Earl has more jobs he'd like that chump Vault Hunter to do!
Not now, Claptrap. It's pretty safe to say that the Borderlands series has pioneered the looter-shooter genre. For those unfamiliar, this takes the loot-driven gameplay of Diablo likes and places it in the shooter framework with occasional online and/or RPG components. Borderlands does all of those things and then some. Now don't get me wrong, the first couple hours of the game are a complete drag as the tutorial goes on for several missions explaining how the shops, grenades, vehicles, and fast travel systems work. Once the tutorial segment is over though, the game really hits its stride and all the systems that the game has on display are operating in the player's favor. Players start by picking one of 4 previously mentioned Vault Hunters, each with their own specialties in weapons, abilities, and skill trees. Lilith operates as a siren, specializing in submachine guns and elemental weapons. Her ability is Phase Walk, allowing her to briefly slip into another dimension to become invisible, which upon returning sends a shockwave to damage nearby foes. Her 3 skill trees focus on survivability and crowd control, her damage and usefulness with elemental weapons, and her lethality with weapon and melee combat. Mordecai operates as the Hunter, specializing in pistols and snipers. His ability is the Bloodwing, an AI-controlled bird that attacks enemies for him. The 3 skill trees he focuses on are improving his lethality with snipers, improving the utility and damage of Bloodwing, and improving both pistol and melee attacks.
Greetings, Traveler! New missions are available at the Firestone Bounty Board!
Claptrap, fuck off. I'm in the middle of explaining something. Next up is Roland, who as the soldier specs into combat rifles and shotguns. His special ability is to lay down a turret that is AI controlled to help with killing enemies. The trees that Roland can pursue include increasing his effectiveness with weapons, using support-like abilities to buff himself and others, as well as acting as a medic to keep the team's health topped up. Finally, we have Brick. The character that I played as in this playthrough acts as a berserker, primarily using melee and explosives. His ability Berserk allows him to gain a boost to his speed and survivability in order to give enemies these hands while also shaking your teammate's screen to the point of making them sick. His skill trees are focused on his melee damage, his tankiness, survivability, and his explosive damage. The characters are all unique and fun, and it actually makes it kinda hard to decide who to play as. Except for Roland, he's kind of boring, to be honest. When speccing into the skill trees, it allows you to further create a build to decide how you want to play. Maybe you spec into just one skill tree to make a character super strong in one area. Maybe you grab a couple of skills from a few different trees in order to be a jack of all trades. Or maybe you find some skills that complement each other across a few trees in order to make your own type of build. Borderlands has RPG-like mechanics in that every time you gain a level, your stats improve and you gain a skill point in order to invest in one of the many skill trees. This also means that many of the different areas are soft level gated, meaning that while you could stroll into those areas, if the enemy is a much higher level than you, there may be a little bit too bullet spongy to reliably take down.
Did you know Shep Sanders in the arid Badlands has another job for you?
Okay, Claptrap, seriously, fuck off. Remember what I said about you not being annoying compared to Borderlands 2? Yeah, I take that back. Now seriously, go the fuck away. As I mentioned before, the core loop of the gameplay is to constantly be getting increasingly better shit in order to buff your arsenal. With the amount of loot enemies will be dropping and you'll pilfer from chests, your brain will revert into goblin mode, attempting to steal anything that isn't nailed down. New grenades, shields, class mods to further specialize your character, and of course weapons are plentiful in Borderlands. Most weapons in the game are procedurally generated, meaning that there are over 17 million different weapons. Now that sounds absolutely insane, until you realize that most weapons only really vary in terms of damage, fire rate, or accuracy, and only a few guns here and there have any real special properties. You'll get the occasional shotgun that has bouncing shots, or the launcher that shoots 3 rockets at once, or the alien weapon that shoots literal lightning bolts, and of course any of the elemental weapons that add fire, lightning, explosive, or corrosive damage to a weapon. The rate at which you find loot you actually want is a little bit slower than I'd like. It's nice that you can keep a weapon for 15 to 20 levels without needing to switch it out, but my simplistic brain likes to see damage numbers constantly going up, so I want that consistent boost to my arsenal, which didn't happen too often in this game. If you want the best weapons in the game, it means one of two things. Number 1, get extremely lucky, or 2, grind it out until you get it. More often than not, you'll find a weapon that is inferior to the one you currently have, and you'll sell it for some extra cash to maybe get something better. Actually, one problem I have with the game is how little there actually is in terms of spending money. Shops are a sync to level area, so once you surpass that area, there is very little reason to shop there. Oftentimes, the most significant holes in my in-game wallet came from my deaths. See, every time you die, you get a percentage taken away from your funds in order to respawn at the new use stations. I remember one time I lost over $69,000 just to respawn, which is still somehow more fair than a typical emergency room visit in America. The only other option to avoid death is getting a second win by killing an enemy when you're down, or getting revived by a teammate. This brings us easily to the best feature of Borderlands. You can share in the adventure with up to 3 other players. No matter how lackluster the plot can get, or how grindy the occasional gameplay can be, being able to play the entire game with some buddies brings the game up to a significant degree. There is even a competitive arena mode in which players can face each other in PvP situations. You can also do this outside of the arena in the overworld with your friends by mailing each other in order to decide who has the bigger set of balls. Get fucked, Aaron. Whether it's grinding out some enemies together for some high-level loot, enjoying the story as a collective, or playing a shitty version of bumper cars, the game becomes significantly better when playing with others. Oh yeah, the cars, almost forgot. These control almost a little too well? It's weird. See, it's like there's no environmental feedback unless you run headfirst into a fucking wall. These cars essentially glide over the terrain, mowing down all enemies in their path. You don't get these unlocked until near the end of the tutorial, but when you do, you and a buddy can team up for some double dash style antics in these vehicles.
Whoa! Crazy Earl has more jobs he'd like that Vault Hunter to do.
Okay, fine, fuck you. You want me to talk about the missions? The quest design is a bit of a mixed bag in this game. Quests range from your standard go here and collect / kill X and come back, to arena challenges, to little scavenger hunts. A little drab for the most part. Sometimes the humor or story can hold these up, but more often than not, I felt the quests were lacking. The low point for me has to be the scavenging for weapon pieces. You get brought to a location and have to comb the area for 4 pieces of a weapon, and more often than not, I would find the first 3 pieces rather quickly, and not the final piece for another 5 to 10 minutes. Honestly, it's a bit aggravating.
Hello! There are new missions available at the Middle of Nowhere Bounty Board.
And you better fucking at least accept these missions too, otherwise Claptrap won't shut the fuck up until you do, and he will constantly remind you that it's time to have some fun, fuck whatever you're doing. There. You happy?
Did you know Shep Sanders in the arid Badlands has another job for you?
Alright. No more. One final thing to speak on is Borderlands' emphasis on playing through the game multiple times. On completing the story, you are prompted to do a new game plus of sorts. This new playthrough has increased enemy difficulty and more lucrative loot to gain. This is something I actually passed on in my playthrough. While it doesn't sound like a bad time at all, it isn't something that grabs me as much as a new game plus mode as games like Dark Souls or Resident Evil do. Overall, the gameplay of Borderlands is a solid experience that is elevated drastically by the ability to play it with others. I had a great time playing with my buddies, building my character was engaging, and gathering new loot and killing enemies was fun. Honestly, pretty surprised to see I enjoyed the gameplay from this as much as I did, given the array of issues I saw within the game. Borderlands, for better or worse, is the culmination of every gaming trope of 2009. Open world design, a rigid mission structure, an obsession with violence and gore, pop culture references and dated humor, grindy gameplay, brown and gray color palettes, surface level RPG elements, and skill trees. However, the way that Borderlands is able to weave all of these elements together to create an experience that can appeal to the virgin Fallout nerd and the Chad COD bro is honestly pretty remarkable. The game is flawed, dated, and is a sequel that I honestly think is far superior in most regards. However, I think I can still recommend Borderlands for those who have either never experienced a looter shooter before or are looking for a decent 20-hour adventure to play with a group of friends. After Borderlands' release, Gearbox developed 4 expansions. Now I decided to cover each of these in their own separate video. If Borderlands taught me anything, it's that capitalism always prevails, so clearly I'm going to milk this one game to get as many views as I can. No, seriously, look how long this video is. If I decided to talk about the DLC, we'd probably almost double this video length. I want to give each of these their own time to discuss, so look forward to those videos about each of the expansions coming soon. After Borderlands release, Gearbox batting average left a lot to be desired. The very next game they released was Duke Nukem Forever, which, I mean, come on. You don't need me to tell you that this game was shit. At least after this game, Gearbox cleaned up their act and didn't release any more garbage. You know, it seems like every time I say stuff like this, I'm always immediately proven wrong. Borderlands 2 was released in 2012. Oh shit, I wasn't actually wrong this time. This game's actually great. Borderlands 2 improved upon the groundwork laid by the first in almost every way and was a critical and commercial success, even more so than the original. This cemented Borderlands as a certified franchise, as more games were greenlit for future projects such as Tales from the Borderlands in 2015. Gearbox would come back again in 2013 with Aliens Colonial Marines. There's the punchline. I knew it was too good to be true. Yeah, this game was fucking awful too. Considered one of the worst games released in that decade, which was definitely not a good look for Gearbox. The following year, Gearbox released Borderlands the pre-sequel. There was a really weird time in the early to mid 2010s where it seemed there were a ton of needless sequels of games that, while not bad, weren't very impactful or important. I kind of categorized this game with the likes of God of War Ascension, Batman Arkham Origins, and Gears of War Judgment. 2016 saw the release of Battleborn. If I had a nickel for every time I've talked about Battleborn in a video, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but when you consider I have 3 videos, it's weird that it's happened twice. This game did okay for like a week or whatever, and then Overwatch came and the game completely disappeared. After the lackluster at best release over the previous years, Gearbox released Borderlands 3 in 2019, which received relatively positive reviews. I've never played this one myself, but I've heard it's mostly good, but not as strong as the second game. This brought a renewed interest in the series as a movie began production in 2021 based off of the universe. This seems interesting. Video game to film adaptations are about a dime a dozen, and I think I can count the legitimately good ones on one hand, and when 2 of the fingers are occupied by the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, you know the bar is not that high. It's got quite the cast though, directed by Eli Roth from the Hostel series and Green Inferno. We have Cate Blanchett as Lilith, Jamie Lee Curtis as Patricia Tannis, Kevin Hart as Roland, okay, and fucking Jack Black as Claptrap? My god. There hasn't been much to show of this film, so I guess time will tell if this looks good or not. 2022 was a big year for the Borderlands series as both Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and New Tales from the Borderlands saw releases too. Slightly above average to mediocre reviews. Ouch. The franchise isn't running out of steam clearly, and I would expect to see some sort of announcement for a 4th game in the series not too far off in the future. So yeah, that is the legacy of Borderlands. What started as an FPS RPG hybrid with some dark humor thrown into a sci-fi setting, ended up creating its own genre, franchise, propelled Gearbox to one of the largest developers in gaming today, and has now even secured a spot on the silver screen. I have to say I'm glad I took a look back at this game because there's still fun to be had regardless of it showing some wrinkles. I look forward to checking out the DLC and contributing to the discussion with you guys in some future videos. What was your favorite memory of Borderlands? Please feel free to voice your opinions in the comments section below. I read every single one of my comments and it's awesome to see you guys interact together. Leave a like if you enjoyed this review and consider subscribing in order to catch all future content on my channel. I'll catch you guys for the Borderlands DLC.